Good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Davidson, and I'm here to welcome you to a discussion about writing in architecture. I have with me 4 distinguished authors, all of whom I've had the privilege to work with, either in the magazine Blog, which we edit in New York City, or in the book series that we produce called Writing Architecture, published by MIT Press. I'll start at my right, François Roche. I'm sure none of these people need introductions. François Roche, architect, author, from France, now living in Bangkok. Sanford Kwinter, the only non-architect on the stage. Correct? Yes? Oh, no, I'm not one either, sorry. One of 2. Sanford and I have the longest history of working together as an author and editor. Sanford has done a couple of excellent books, one called Far from Equilibrium, which I worked with on him, was published by Akhtar. Sanford teaches at Harvard. Luis Galeano, who many of you know is editor of Architettura Viva, Ave, and other publications coming out of Madrid, and teaches also in Madrid at the university. And Pier Vittorio Aureli, the junior member here, the new Italian voice who lives outside of Italy, is teaching at the Architectural Association in London and at Yale University in the United States. Before we begin the discussion, I would like to thank David Chipperfield for giving us this opportunity. I did not realize until we came to Venice that his team had put together this book, Common Ground, which I think is an extraordinary legacy for this Biennale, because writing is so important to architecture. So as a mild provocation, before I ask Sanford to begin, I would like to simply say, if architectural production itself is a cultural industry, then written discourse provides architecture's medium of exchange and its intellectual wealth. Simply put, there is no architecture without writing. So I hand this over to Sanford.
Wow, I ran into Cynthia a couple of hours ago, and she told me she was going to do exactly what she just did, but I didn't believe it, actually. So the good thing is I came prepared for this, and I was sitting in the back of the last panel here, which was the one about Common Ground. And I scribbled out some notes, which I'm going to make you sit through as I interpret them for you today. But as I was sitting, I couldn't help but, of course, overhear the conversation that was going on with Ricky Burdett and David Chipperfield and others. And I'd like to say at the outset that I have a very deep sympathy for the idea of common ground. Although many of the ideas I overheard during that last discussion interpreted the idea of ground in a way that I found shockingly conservative, even retrograde. I do not think we should be thinking of ground as something that is fixed and absolute, and it seemed to me that in many ways there was a weird return under the obviously acceptable auspices of the common to accept some kind of entirely outdated and retrograde concept of ground. Now, the common idea is also very interesting, though I do feel that I do not believe that one has, in any way, overemphasized the concept of common ground, but I think that one can. And I think that various forms of disciplined conflict, actually, are perhaps sometimes, well, I would say they're indispensable, so I wouldn't want to throw that out. And in the spirit of the idea of conflict and strife, etc., I thought to myself, well, what role would be better for me if Cynthia actually did hand the mic over to me after just presenting the idea about writing and architecture, than to try to provoke my fellow panelists. So I wrote a few comments, and I hope they do provoke. To begin, and this will certainly find some familiarity, I think, with the older people in the audience. I was educated in an era in which it was commonplace to refute, or else to confirm, the supposed implicit antagonism between the building and the book. Everybody knows the ceci tuera cela cliché. Now this belongs to an era of the post-war, pre-digital world. The terms of the book and the building were not right, but the intimation of a predatory or agonistic relationship in which books must defend their territory or risk being supplanted has turned out, alas, to be prophetic. The book, as we know, is not dead, and as somebody said to me last night at dinner, but it is on death row. And that is not a commutative sentence. It is something that can be deferred, but I fear that the era of the book is closing. If the book was a repository for writing, and as such a repository, it both at once favored and protected a form of activity that we call, or maybe we should say we called, thought. Today, writing has been very significantly dissociated from the book, and by extension, and much more significantly, writing has been dissociated from thought. Today, I promise you all there will be a provocation of a very concise nature at the end of this. Today, the vast majority of writing has to do with short-term communications, with continuous updating, with mere memorializations of external events, registration of one's status in real and existential time and space, and nothing more, and of what formal linguistics used to call the phatic function, which is the stratum of conversation which conveys no particular information other than confirming that the participants remain attuned to one another's utterances. It's merely letting someone know you're still online in the old sense of the word. The idea that writing is exhausted, let's say, by the concept of communication has undergone a recent and mostly tacit transformation. There is an idea around today, and I think it's quite common, that there is a kind of completeness that is achieved when information has been transferred from one actor to another. And this, of course, has much to do with the fact that we tend to define and conceive of everything in terms of information. There is a great and tragic betrayal in this modern conception that leaves the problem of thought dangerously to the side. A second betrayal, the one that was just evoked now by Cynthia, that is invisibly taking place today, has to do with the supplanting of text by images, the extraordinary advance of the capture, storage, and transmission of images has made way for a purely analogical and redundant modality of interactive exchange, one from which thought, as we knew it, is largely excluded. It's my assertion, then, that architectural production has never been separable from the psychic modalities cultivated in and harbored by writing, and that architecture today is and can be no different. So my provocation to the panel is to ask whether havens, protected places, safe zones, etc., for thought, and hence for writing, need to be actively, even artificially maintained today in order to protect the possibilities within architecture that are not accommodated in the contemporary world. But, and as Cynthia points out, I didn't know this. I thought everyone here was a non-architect like me. But I'm getting an architecture degree very soon. I'm going to promise you all that. I'm not going to have it said any longer that I'm different from everybody else on the panel. In sum, to my fellow panelists, can the culture of building today can it serve to give a home to thought and provide a space for writing rather than to rely on, I was writing, somebody must have said something provocative on the previous panel just as I hit this word. Oh yes, then rather than to rely on the reverse traditional relationship that is now on the brink of collapse.
Cynthia tells me I don't have to reply. No, but I
You're
could.
an architect, you don't have to reply.
Being an architect, I don't know. I may perhaps reply something to Cynthia's presentation when she said that the log project was against the predominance of the image. And I feel ill at ease when I cannot show you images, because we architects think with images. We think with our eyes. And I see, they tell me, no, you cannot project things, you cannot show images in this tent. But now I see all these lights and say, come on, it could have been arranged for a projector to show images instead of the common ground thing. Because I think that we do need images to speak to each other. You do? Yeah, I think we do. We architects are a special race in which we think with images. And without images, I would like to stand up and, go at the screen, and I cannot, because we were not allowed to use images. Perversely enough.
That wasn't...
Even Cynthia, when she says that was against, but every now and then she prints some images. And she cannot avoid having a postcard, in the... because she needs an image for us to catch the attention. So I think when she says architecture cannot exist without writing, I would say architecture cannot exist without images. Images are more important than writing. Architectural writing, which has been influential, has been that which has been accompanied by images. We know that the first translations of... Open it up, Cynthia. This is the more images. Always images. Wherever you open it, you have an image to stress your point. Because we are visual animals.
So I think first, well, it's working. So there's a big misunderstanding, of course, as architects are doing all the time, and critics first. That is not an image, it's a writing. It's a writing, it's a tattoo writing I did on my back on the log. So I try to understand that how the writing also could be applied as a masochism possibility to suffer and to discover the pain of the writing, not only the pain of the writing by emitting the writing, but by writing the writing on your own skin as a pig. And to consider finally the possibility that you consider yourself not as a predominant species on the world, but also as an animal which is able to absorb or to absorb the painful coming from the writing. So, well, it's not an image. Sorry for this misunderstanding, but well, and it's a true tattoo. It's a true tattoo. So it's not a fake done fake, fake done rape, fake done fake. It's not a fake. It's just to do it. But mainly writing for us, it's to consider the architecture as a byproduct of the writing. We have always considered since a long time ago that we have to write scenario between any emotional design. It was a possibility for us to escape from this kind of sweetie, comfortable plagiarism and copyism which is running since the digital period in the architecture field, where people are reproduction images without understand the raison d'être of what they are doing. So basically it's interesting to write. To write could produce a movie, could produce an after effect or a collateral effect or an artifact, which is better in a way, an artifact becoming a building or becoming the possibility or the potential of the building. So it's pretty interesting how Antonio Negri now in the writing, in the log, is a little bit try to understand or try to analyze the situation of this under-proletarian condition of the architect now by a non-revendication against any abusement of the capitalism. And our architects are used now to assemble the 40 in the chain of Detroit. It's not exactly the 40, it's more, the 40, it's more the city skyline, where we are assembling structures, components coming from industry without a re-question for what, for who, in wind condition, and where we are, and from where we are extracting authority, an authority in the term of Lacanian hypothesis, from where we are getting an authority to justify our authority. So writing is to re-articulate what Foucault is talking in the discourse, in the order of the discourse, is to re-articulate the truth and the false, is to re-articulate the reason and the madness, is to re-articulate the forbidden.
Pier Vittorio, I would like to say, I neglected earlier to say that a book that Pier Vittorio and I spent 3 years working on together, The Possibility of an Absolute Architecture. He is the author. Pier Vittorio.
Okay. Yes, since this is a conversation, I would like to reply to what has been said so far. But first of all, I think it's important to ask ourselves, why do architects write? I mean, why writing became so important for architecture? And actually, this question implies a paradox, which is exactly the paradox of an architect who writes. Historically, writing for an architect is the first moment in which who used to be a builder become an intellectual. And it's the first moment where an architect can, at the time, of course, in the 15th century, he's not yet recognized as an architect as we know it today. But it's the first moment in which an architect can self-initiate a project. Before writing, architects were, or builders, were very often, let's say, forced to accomplish a commission. But it's precisely through, within the space of writing, architects who write, that architecture is formulated as a project that can perhaps be independent from the, let's say, driving force of the commission or the patron. Of course, writing is not innocent. Writing was a strategy to even reinforce the demands for architecture and therefore the search for a patron. We know, for example, that the first text, modern text on architecture, The Art of Building by Alberti, was written in Latin because Alberti had no interest to convince what at that time were builders or early architects, but he wanted to address only patrons. Nevertheless, it's through this book that the architect is able to construct a project that goes beyond the commission, that goes beyond the ad hoc solution for a specific problem. So in a way, we can say that writing from the beginning is the locus of the autonomy of the architect as an intellectual, someone who is able to formulate not only the answer, but the question itself, the problem, why architecture? So that's, in a way, the, if you want, the historical origin of writing. But today, actually, we live in a paradoxical situation where this condition has been twisted completely. First of all, we know that the rising of writing in architecture cannot be disconnected from its technology, which was, of course, what was invented at the moment writing became a practice for an architect, the art of printing. The fact that writing is not just a solitary, let's say, job, but it comes with editing, it comes with printing, so it's a form of production. It's a form of intellectual labor. And I think that today this condition of intellectual labor, as François just mentioned, has exploded to the point that today intellectual labor is one of the most, not only one of the most diffuse form of production, but also one of the most exploited form of production. And in fact, this sort of initiative, this autonomy of us being able to write, to self-initiate a magazine or an exhibition or networking with other people, it's turned against us. It makes us much more productive, I would say hyper-productive. Everybody basically is a writer. Everybody can text a message. Everybody can communicate. And of course, what was defined as a possibility of autonomy, of creating a critical distance with actually the demands, the pressures from the outside, has become a form of hyper, let's say, subjectivation. And I think that we have to somehow reflect on writing starting from this paradox. And I think that one way to answer to this condition is to think again writing not as a pure idealist condition, but really as a technology, as an apparatus.
Okay, then I have to ask François, because when François and I did the issue together, he insisted that every single image in the magazine, and sometimes we have a full-page image, usually a drawing, he insisted that every image be the size of a postage stamp. Why did you weight the issue that way, François? And why did you even want to do this compendium of essays? What is the value in it, in in your thinking, in your production, in this intellectual production that Pier Vittorio was talking about?
In the sense, it was also to reintroduce the image visible for some reason. So not only because they have a kind of beauty or elegance, or they could better attract the stupid student of architecture, as I was before, buying only review because there's beautiful four-color pictures. So it was also to take, because of the absence of the pictures which appears take another importance. And the two pictures which appears was one by Robot, the work with Philippe Parreno and Stéphane Henrich, how they reproduced the last letter of Marilyn Monroe. How with the technology we have the nostalgia, we could develop a degree of nostalgia. That is the pictures, but the pictures is the writing pictures, again, like my tattoo on my back. And the second pictures we took is pictures which are done by fortuitous. Pictures which are done by hazard, by chance. Done by Camille Acadé in Bangkok, just on bicycle, taking pictures, and how the flash, finally, of the pictures are stopping the fish, like petrifying the people on the street, and how we could get from this petrification the fluid, this kind of invisible fluid that the spiritism and the magnetism of mesmerism was talking at the beginning of the 19th centuries. So to touch the unknown. The picture was more interesting in a way to touch the unknown and to reveal what is the Black Forest, what could be appears in the Black Forest, not in the prostitution of the four-color pictures, which appears everywhere, so we don't need in log to do that. What is interesting here is we could sell the product, because it's a product, without to conform ourselves to the system of valuable full colors. That's right. After, why I'm writing in terms of from where I'm coming, I'm more coming in the désobéissance civil désobéissance of voluntary servitude of La Boétie. I'm more using the writing to reveal the conflict, to reveal, sometimes also, like La Boétie, to reveal our own masochism, and to redevelop through the writing the rule of our own masochism. Not to let the sadism of the system profit of our naivety, like Sade developed perfectly, the cruel and the cold of Deleuze, how finally we could contractualize, now recontractualize our servitude. So by the way, the condition of our servitude has to be redeveloped, the language. Another aspect of the writing also is to understand the new Babel Tower. And the new Babel Tower, you are not only the English, you are not only the French, you are also the scripting, like Ezio did on Dave, on Roland in the log. Scripting, the new language. We could, through mathematics, also develop, we cannot deny that is a new language. We have to introduce also this language in the Babel. Not to exclusively make this language as a main language, of course. I'm not a fetishism about mathematics, but we have to consider all the language. So to reappropriate language is not for me to take, to make valuable on one and to disqualify some others, but to hear the buzzing, the whispering, the confusing, the chaos of many languages together.
so many languages together is what I found in this 25 issue. I confess I couldn't understand any of the pieces, but the one by Sanford and another one by Patricia Williams, the rest of them were incomprehensible to me. And I suppose I'm growing old. I'm growing old, Peter.
No, but that
24 issues in which I could understand things, and now an issue comes in which I cannot understand the word. Maybe it's time for us to shut up.
I mean, I really love this kind of self-disqualification you are doing to say, I'm not so naive, I'm so stupid, finally, I regret that I'm so stupid, I cannot understand something which is complex. You have to take the risk, my friend, to understand something you cannot understand. The unknown is a risk. It's a heterotopian notion of Foucault. You have to walk alone in the forest, even if it's a sunset, even if the ghost and the witch or the wizard are coming back. You have to take the risk to walk in something you cannot entirely predict. So by the way, please, buy the full collection of log. It's time, you're not so old. Buy the full collection of log now to swim inside.
When Pier Vittorio says we have to rethink what writing is in architecture, and I think there is a risk in this log that Luis Galiano doesn't understand, because Tony Vidler back in New York told me he read log twice, from front to back, and said there's no architecture theory in there. And log has been a kind of haven for architecture theory because there's a kind of anti-theory backlash right now. It's been going on for a while. So if you're writing theory, I get lots of stuff for log that a lot of it doesn't see print, but one does have to take risks, and we have to take risks in kinds of writing. And I think that in this kind of society, there was a recent article in the New York Times that my managing editor, David Huber, brought to my attention about criticism, actually about literary criticism, but saying that we are in a culture of enthusiasm and liking things on Facebook, and that this is limiting our ability to write, to have a thought, to have an intellectual idea that we then can disseminate through writing. And this is apart from our argument about the image, okay? This is just about thought and being able to take a position and saying, this is worth thinking about, and that is not. And who's taking the risk to do that today, because we all have to be friends.
Let me say something, because here we are establishing a kind of connection between chaos and risk. And if something is not chaotic, is not risky, why? I think I admire you as an editor because you strive for clarity and elegance. Clarity and elegance is very difficult. It takes a great effort. It's not easy. Writing chaotically, I think, is easier. Just you let it go and that's it. But respecting grammar rules, which may be sort of old-fashioned, is still for me something that is part of our business, is part of our job, is part of our craft. So, Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset said that the clarity was the courtesy of the intellectual. And I still think that clarity should be the courtesy of all of those of us that write about architecture. When I cannot understand something, maybe I have not worked enough, but it may also happen that whoever is writing it has not taken the effort, sometimes the great effort, to write with clarity and elegance. In plain English, something, because we have to communicate with large audiences. We cannot speak for a small clique of convinced. And to get these large audiences that will get you the constituencies, to get grants and whatever for writing at the university, for that we must speak to an audience which is not those of us convinced here, but to society at large.
Pier Vittorio, do you have a final word? You want to respond to any of this?
About the issue of clarity, I think that, architectural writing, unlike other forms of writing, like literature, has no value in itself. It's always instrumental to a thesis. So I think that elegance, for me, is not an issue, since I don't consider myself a good writer, as you know very well. But clarity is an issue. I think when you have something you believe is important and urgent, You don't even question whether you are clear or not. You try to be as clear as possible. And for me, when you are not clear, yes, that could be a possibility, and I'm sure this might be the case of François, where you want to make things more difficult and challenging. But most of the time, for me, complexity is an alibi to not, let's say, be straightforward and clear with your own position. And I think we have suffered, I would say, a long time in which writing is this kind of commentary where at the end anything can be said. We have lack of writing that is clear, even if it's wrong. Sometimes I really appreciate texts that are complete disagree and I consider wrong, but nevertheless have the clarity of someone who really knows what he's talking about and wants to make it understandable and therefore questionable. So I would say that clarity is not at the service of persuasions, but clarity is at the service of being questionable, offer something that can be debated. If something is not clear, I'm sorry, it cannot be debated. It cannot be questioned.
No, you cannot take a position without that. I would like to thank you all for your patience listening to this panel. I think I would like to encourage all of you to engage in the difficult intellectual production, unpaid, of writing. It's important for, as Pier Vittorio said, self-initiative and sometimes self-identification. Thank you very much for being here. Enjoy the Biennale.